This afternoon, we're going to be talking about communications. I think yesterday with Buba, you talked a little bit about how to interpret the MPI. In other words, now that you've done all the wonderful work in terms of developing the measure, then you have something that you want to sell, that you want to talk about, that you want to communicate. The first thing you want to do is keep the lights on. The second thing you want to do is keep your own light burning as you think about how it is that you are going to communicate what you just found out. You are now the technical person. You've got this wealth of information. In fact, you've got too much information. You've got numbers upon numbers upon numbers, and you know that you can't communicate it all. So the question is, how do you communicate? What do you communicate? When do you communicate it? How do you communicate it? And that's what we're going to talk about in the next hour and a half. And to start us off, we're going to talk to Sabina's going to present sort of how is it that you find interesting things to talk about? Because there's so many things that you could talk about. So I'm going to have Sabina start, and then I will continue on afterwards with the communication.
Thanks so much. So if I could just put out a question. If you just think about the global MPI and before you came to this course, what are one or two things you remember that you learned about it that maybe got you interested in looking further? Do you remember any sort of bits of information? No, okay.
Measures dimensions of power that monetary measures can.
Okay. Yeah, brings into view things that monetary glasses don't. Anything else?
That's the reason, because the reason,
Mm-hmm.
the reason within the regions, countries.
Right. So large variation or maps with different colors of intensities. Yeah. Anything else? Yep.
It was showing a consistent pattern with the monetary poverty
Mm-hmm.
in some places.
Yep. Yep.
Seemed comprehensive and kind of its scope.
Okay. So it's quite interesting because you're not remembering any factoids. So, so maybe factoids are not so important. Maybe it's the presentation of the measure. But a factoid that came out in 2010 when we launched the measure was that there were more MPI poor people in the 8 largest states of India than in the continent of sub-Saharan Africa. So that was an empirical finding. That was a factoid, and at least in India, because it came out when they opened the Indira Gandhi Airport in New Delhi the same day, it sort of hit the media because here India was invested in this fantastic airport, which is fantastic, and we're very grateful for, and yet visibilizing the poverty in this way was for some people a bit striking because they thought all of the poverty would be in other regions, and they didn't really recognize the numbers of poor people in India itself. So what we can do as researchers is, in a sense, to try to offer some striking findings that somehow surprise people, that somehow put them into a perspective that they are interested in and something that they can't have anticipated. So you might actually wake them up a little bit. So it's very difficult for us to do this. I confess I don't read the newspapers every day. And when I do, I certainly don't analyze what they say about poverty or facts. But people who do are much better at this than I am because they sort of see the kinds of things that newspapers or journalists pick up on a regular basis, and that sensitizes them to the kinds of factoids they might be looking for in their own analysis. But also keep asking the questions of why does this measure matter? What am I going to do with it? So much of our time is spent on computing it, making the tables beautiful, checking the robustness, checking everything. But then we have to, at some point, sit in shift gears and try to communicate it to somebody who doesn't love numbers. And so it requires us to really try to look at our own work from a different perspective. And it can be useful, actually, if you usually look at your tables on a screen to print them out. If you usually work in your office, to go to a couch, or to go to a different place, or to have a different drink of some description or another with your tables as you're reading them. And you also have to recognize that most of your brilliant ideas will fall flat on your face. The number of times my communications director has said, Sabina, that is not an angle. is quite interesting. So we have to be popcorn boxes of ideas, of possible media angles, and then somebody else will tell us what really does resonate with them to try to communicate something about poverty which is going to move people with power to act to reduce it. Because in a sense, that is the aim of communication. So what are some of the factoids? Who are the poorest of the poor? Jose Manuel Roche, Schumann, and I at some point looked at the bottom billion with Andy Sumner. We stacked up effectively everybody across the countries according to their CI score, censored CI score, from the poorest to the least poor. And then we cut it off at as near a billion as you could, with the variation in a K cutoff, which happened to be a K of 44.44%. And then we could analyze where did the poorest billion live by country, and then by subnational region, and then by individual. If it was by country, where's Schumann? What is it, 32 countries or something. By subnational region, 245. By person, it was in nearly every country. So it enabled us, in a sense, to focus on the bottom billion persons and to show the different ways of looking at them. Another was how many MPI poor people live in middle income countries. That was something that had come up in income poverty, where Andy Sumner, for example, had done the story on how X% of the income poor people live in middle income countries. So why are these countries not eligible for development assistance? So out of curiosity, we did the same. We used the same country categories, we mimicked the same analysis, and Christoph did it this year. And we've come with a very, very similar story, that it's around 70% of the MPI poor people who live in middle income countries. And then there was some interest in, isn't it the case, as we have seen, that in high income countries, MPI is very low? And so really, don't we simply want to focus on lifting GDP per capita? So at that time, we've compared Philippines and India. Philippines and India that year had roughly the same GDP per capita, about $1,310. But in Philippines, poverty rates were 12-14%. In India, 54%. And MPI values were different as well, but the media is more interested in headcount ratios than MPI. So these are the kinds of striking factoids that, in a sense, you can come up with just to try to say that GDP and MPI don't automatically walk together. For those of you who know the HDI, of course, they always did that with the HDI. What countries dropped rank most or raised rank most, comparing the rank by HDI, Human Development Index, and the rank by GDP, GNI per capita. But your purpose is after lunch, after a long technical course, after regression, after inequality among the poor. The aim is to wake people up and to really have them think differently about the numbers. So how do you do that? Everybody does it differently. Here's some example of factoids. Plastic straws are used 5 to 10 minutes, but the lifespan for their degradation is 300 years. That's going to make you think next time you go out and have a plastic straw. Of course, that was before biodegradable plastic, but these things. So these are the things we are looking for, not something for an academic paper, but something for a call-out box, something for a headline. So you might start from an idea or a controversy. For example, the Millennium Development Goals count countries. What percentage of countries in South Asia are on track to reduce these SDGs, to meet the SDGs? Of course, it very much matters if the country is Bhutan or Maldives or India or Pakistan, because the populations are so different. And so you might object to the fact that counting countries actually values the lives of a person in India 1/4,000th of the value that it would give to the life of a person in Maldives, because of the difference in populations between the countries. So you may just want to start from a controversy or a question. As I said, in terms of the mixed countries, we started from a question. This fact exists for unidimensional poverty, for monetary poverty. Is it the same for MPI poverty or not? And it would be interesting to hear from you. Each of us have probably done this in the past, but how you do it. Because I don't really think that there's a science. For me, I just look at the tables and then I start to play. I get ideas and I check them, and most of them come to nothing. But I just simply start to play with tables. Other people may do it differently. When OFI as a team finish the MPI computations, we send around the tables, and each of us sort of say, okay, what do we see this year? What do we find that's interesting this year? And some years we have a bumper crop of headlines, and some years we have less inspiration. But it would be interesting for each of us, to find out from our colleagues how do they do this, of really trying to find out what's intriguing and interesting in your facts. But one other word of caution is to make sure that whatever you put out is completely accurate and completely defensible. Because if it goes out in the media or goes out somewhere, then somebody naturally will want to check it. And if you have stretched it, if you're based on false foundations, then it'll be found out. And that could discredit the whole work. So also, if one of us have found a factoid, then the others of us have to check it and make sure that in a sense it holds water, that we can replicate it, and that when we really think about it from a critical perspective, it's going to be something that if some critical mind comes to explore it, they're not going to find something we wouldn't want to show. Here's another example. I did this, or Bouba presented something similar this year for Niger and South Sudan. We were in Pakistan, and at that point there wasn't much interest in reporting poverty, and I found that a bit distressing. I had done my doctoral fieldwork in Pakistan. I was just really passionate to make work that would serve the people there. So for that presentation, I thought, okay, we need something for the people of Pakistan to think about it. And I started playing. And this is what I came up with, that in Niger, Pakistan is here in terms of your familiar H and A graphic. Niger at that time was the poorest. It was not with the current 2012 data. This was the 2006 data. And according to those data, 93% of people were poor, and the average intensity was 69.4. So if you look at Pakistan here and Niger there doesn't seem to be any relationship between their poverty. And so then again, you try to think about people. You start to play with population. You start to zoom in a little bit. And looked at the number, counted the number of people who were MPI poor in Niger, and it was 13.4 million. So then went to Pakistan, and with the data there, we didn't have the subnational decompositions that year. So just, you remember the wheel of intensity. So I found everyone whose CI score, censored CI score, was 70% or higher. Because look, Niger, it's 69%. So who in Pakistan is deprived in at least 70% of indicators at the same time? And how many people are there? What do you think? Yeah, so there were more. So there were 82.7 million MPI poor people in Pakistan, and 15.5 million were deprived in 70% or more of the deprivations. And so, in a sense, this community of Niger was also inside Pakistan, because there was such inequality among the poor that within Pakistan were some extremely poor populations. So that's a little bit just about encouraging you with an art, not a science, with a kind of curiosity that they don't teach. I was never taught any of this in graduate school. I don't know if you are. If you are, I would love to learn how they teach it. So it would be really fun at some point to actually, I'm sure John will do this at the end of class, to share experiences and hear from you how you do this. But I'll pose the question now, and then at the end of class we can turn around and hear a little bit more from you. Back to you.
Okay, so now we're going to switch gears. Now you've done your technical analysis. You've been thinking about factoids, facts. Who do you want to talk to? Who are you going to communicate with? Why are you going to communicate? I'm fine, thank you very much. I like sitting at my desk. I don't want to communicate it. Who are you going to communicate? Anybody? Any thoughts about who you might communicate it with?
President.
First of all, you're probably going to talk to your president? Good. Go to the top. I mean, the best place to go is right to the top. If you get the president to say yes, you've done your work, you can go home. Usually the first person you're going to communicate is your partner, your friends, people who you know, right? You're going to have a beer and say, good Lord, do you know what I found? I found that Niger is as poor as Pakistan, or whatever, And they're going to say, huh? And you're going to say, well, maybe that's not important to you, but it's important to me. And then, so then you realize that there's a gap between, you've been living this stuff every day for, say, several months, right? This is your life. You've been working it, and even your partner doesn't really know what you've been doing, right? So you're going to have to figure out, how do I talk about it? In English, not in numbers, right? I mean, if you want to talk to me, you got to talk in English or in Spanish. Or if you talk to your president, he doesn't want to see. How many numbers does he want to see? Zero. He probably doesn't want to see the zero because that implies he's in debt or he's probably in trouble. But no numbers, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Presidents don't like, well, they like to see numbers, especially if they look good in their numbers, right? But they don't like long equations. Why? Because they probably don't understand them. I don't understand them. So I can't communicate them effectively. Now, you might be able to. So the first thing you got to think about is, okay, it's important to be able to communicate. Personally, I believe that if you cannot communicate something, it doesn't exist. You could have the most brilliant idea in your head. If you can't tell anybody about it, it's not a very brilliant idea to anybody else, right? So communications is absolutely crucial. It's crucial in everything you do. It's crucial if you want a cup of coffee. It's crucial if you want to ask somebody for a date. It's crucial if you want to sell the MPI. Oh, yeah, it's crucial if you want to talk about numbers. So the question then becomes, how do you do it? And then the question becomes, why? Hey, I'm very happy, thank you very much. I like my numbers. Don't bother me. But why do we want to communicate this? What's the point? What's the whole point of your being here, I hope? What's the point, besides getting your PhD doctorate degree and getting on with it? What is the point of this? Why do we want to communicate? What's the ultimate aim?
To help the poor.
To help the poor. Ay, Dios mío, gracias. I mean, to help the poor. I mean, we're all in this for why. We're hopefully, you're in it for a lot of reasons, okay? We're all in it for a lot of reasons. We're in it for our own career. We're in it because we're part of our job. But hopefully also we're in it because we want to help other people. And because it's called the multidimensional poor index, we're probably interested in poverty. Or if not, we wouldn't be working in this area, right? So that's what you have to have in mind. How do I get this communicated so it actually helps people? Poor people. So why don't we just go talk to poor people?
It is to mediate through policy.
Huh?
Through policy. You have to change the policy.
So somehow we've got to go from the technical through policy to help poor people. Thank you very much. Okay, so basically we need then to be able to have policies that usually are government. They can be private sector, they can be any sector, but it's government that we're talking about mostly. Government policies that then try to have some impact on the poor, right? That's the point. Okay, now we got the point. Now, think about what you're going to communicate. Think about who you're going to communicate it to. I mean, there's an academic exercise, fine. But you want to basically be able to come to say, there are a few tips, okay? I'm going to go through tips throughout this, but here's some tips. First of all, the one thing, if you learn nothing else, what we're going to talk about in the next hour, is keep it simple. And then some people add stupid, but you don't have to be stupid to keep it simple. But keep it simple. Why? Because most of us are pretty simplistic people. We don't understand long words like multidimensional. What is multidimensional? I don't know. Half the people don't understand multidimensional. It's many dimensions, or it's many deprivations, or it's many things that people have that are poor. But multidimensional, there are a number of wordings, so keep it simple. Another one that I'll forget later, but I just want to make sure I don't forget. Censored head count. Oh, you mentioned censored head count to a politician. What are you censoring? What are you censoring? I believe in human rights. No, I don't believe in censored data. You're censoring data. For you it means something, but for me it means that you're up to something. I'm being very serious. I'm being very serious. So you don't censor your data. You then make cutoffs and you explain it differently. You just say, hey, guess what? Those rich people, we don't need to deal with them anymore because we're dealing with poor people. Therefore, we're only going to deal with poor people. Now, it took you a little longer than censored data, but at least you understood it. So you have to be very careful with your language. Avoid complexity. And we academic, we love jargon. In fact, I shouldn't say academic. You government people also love jargon. Everybody has jargon. So you have to try to avoid the jargon and come down to simple words if you can. And then you want to say, this is what Sabina was saying earlier, if you don't know something, make sure that what you say is true. Because somebody is going to come after you if it isn't. They're going to come after you anyway, so you better make sure that you're right. Because there are a lot of people who don't agree with multidimensional poverty. So you better make sure that your facts are correct. You better make sure that what you say is correct, and don't exaggerate. I have a hard time with that because I tend to exaggerate. So you have to be careful not to exaggerate. It's very difficult. I always like to say, it's not, this is what you have. So you avoid complexity. When you don't know it, you say you don't know it, and then, like what I say when I don't know half the things people ask me, okay? What do I say? I say, no se preocupe. I say, don't worry about a thing. I'm going to find somebody to find the answer for you. We'll get back to you tomorrow. But then, you better get back to them tomorrow. Because then you lose your credibility. If you lose your credibility, you have nothing left. But make sure that you think you can answer it tomorrow before you say, I'm going to answer you tomorrow. If not, you just say, I don't know. But we'll try to find the answer. So just be really clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Find the factoids. We talked about that already. Metaphors, we'll talk about it in a minute. And then, I'm going to say hello to you. Hi, how you doing? Okay, good. See, you got her action the first time she said it. Make it interesting. Make it action-oriented. Make it exciting. Somebody's going to respond to you if she's going to You're not going to respond. Right? So you want to make sure you're whoopie-doo. You got that and you're going to say something. Now, you don't have to be a alpha male A type drop to say it, but just say it. Say it sincerely. Say it honestly. You have to figure out who you are. You cannot communicate the way John Hammett communicates. You got to communicate the way you communicate. Because if you can't, it's not honest if you start trying to be somebody you're not. So if you happen to be an introvert, then you're an introvert. That's fine. Figure out how and when and where and how to communicate. If you happen to be an extrovert, then try to rein in that extrovert self to figure out when and where and how you communicate. Okay, so let's move on because we have a lot to do. I'm going to start here. We're going to try to go through all of these. Seems to me that when you communicate anything, you got to follow those steps, or at least you have some idea of those steps. What's a goal? What is a goal? You all have goals? Let's just start the person up. What's the goal of, let's think about it personally. You have goals in your own life? What's the goal that you have in your own, or in this course or in your life? You got a goal? Who has a goal? Nobody has a goal in life? Oh, you guys. I mean, there must be a goal. Somebody must have the goal. Yes, no, yeah, I got it. No?
I don't know. Help the poor people.
Okay, so a goal might be to help poor people. But what is, okay, so a goal is what? A goal is that which you want to achieve. That's the goal, right? It's an objective. It's that which you want to have happen. So the first thing you got to know is, what is it that you want to achieve with your communication? You don't want to communicate for the heck of communicating. You want to achieve because you want something done. For example, if you want to try to get the MPI picked up by international media, as Sabina was just saying, a lot of times the media people will say, oh, that'll never fly because your goal is to reach the international media. That fact will not make it. So you got to know what your goal is. If your goal is academic, then that fact will make it, perhaps. I don't know. But you need to have an idea of what it is you're trying. First of all, the goal. Secondly, and we'll talk about these. Secondly, what is it you're going to communicate? You got to have a goal. Okay, I know I want to get to that clock. How do I get to that clock? One way to go is I could go walking over there, step on that table, and touch that clock. That's one goal. That's one way to do it, right? That's how to do it. But you then want to have, what's your message? My message is going to be, it's 2:30, right? Let's say that's my message. Then that's my message. I don't have to start thinking about how I'm going to, once I know where I want to get to, I got to know how do I get from here to there. And the way to get from here to there is you got to answer the rest of these questions. What clearly are you trying to say? And make it as clearly as you can. Who do you need to say it to? Right? That's the audience. Who are you going to talk to? You're going to talk to your president. Is it only the president or is there somebody else? How am I going to talk to them? What channels do I use? Do I use the radio, the television? what tools do I need? And then the WWW approach, not George W, but WWW, okay? Just 3 W's of the who, why, when, and where. Oh, 4 W's. But anyways, the who, the when, and the where. Who do you talk to? When do you talk to them? And where do you talk to them? They're all very important. And lastly, once you've done all that, you also have to realize that you approach all this with a bit of humility. Because our end goal is to help the poor. So we're going to push, and we're going to push to help the poor. We don't want to be transformed during the process of helping the poor into being somebody who we're not, or in saying things that we don't believe in. So we want to be humble. We want to say, this is what we can do up to here. The MPI is good for this. It isn't great for this. The MPI is the best tool that we have today. 10 years from now, there might be a much better tool. Now, you may or may not want to include that in your message, but it's true. So therefore, you need to approach all this with a bit of humility and a bit of remembering what is realistic in terms of your own limitations, your budget, the amount of people you have, etc. Okay, is that the game? Everybody's clear? That's the game plan. We're going to try to do that relatively soon, in the next hour, half hour. Good? So let's do goals. Okay. Let's assume that your goal, well, let's not assume anything. Let's pick a goal. We're interested in the SDGs and we're interested in the MPI. What's the goal? What's the possible goal about the MPI and the Sustainable Development Goals? Any ideas? Yeah.
Get the MPI to be one of the indicators that is measured.
Gosh, I must have paid both of you out at the same time. To get the MP, she said, to get the MPI as one of the indicators into the SDGs. Now that's a clear goal, right? It's very clear. It doesn't mean that I have to talk to the SDGs about anything else. I don't want to talk to them about good governance. It'd be great to talk to them about good governance, but we're not going to talk about that right now, unless it gets you in to the MPI as an indicator, which it might, because the MPI is used for good governance. Okay, so then you need to think about, that's, if I use the good governance idea, it's to sell the idea of my goal. Right? So you have to have a clear sense of what your goal is. And I didn't invent this, just because you may think that I did, but let's assume that that is our goal. The first thing we got to do in all of this is what I said earlier.
Yeah.
We got to keep the language simple. We got to keep the strategy simple. Strategy can be complex, but at least needs to appear simple. You don't want to appear to be overselling something, because if you're overselling something, you're going to get caught at it. So keep it simple, stupid, and then what's the goal? The goal in the SDGs, as she said, is to have the global MPI included as a tier 1 indicator in the SDGs. That's our goal. It's very clear. Thank you very much. You didn't make that slide up, but you did. So it has to be, what about that purpose? It has to be clear, it has to be understandable, it has to be simple, concise, and reachable. If it's not reachable, it's too far. Now, it's always good to stretch, like getting the SDG, like this one, that's a stretch. But it's reachable. It's got to be something that's potentially reachable, even if it's only reachable in 10 years. But it can't be like walking on water. That might be possible for some people, but I don't think it's a reachable goal for many people to walk on water. Therefore, it's not a reachable goal. But if you have a goal like getting this one, that's a reachable goal. Now, some goals you can reach. I want to know what time it is. That's my goal. I did it. It took me 5 seconds, less. Some goals take a lot of work. Some goals take 10 years. Some goals take 20 years. And Sabina and I started with what did we start? The Oxford Poverty Human Development Initiative. We had a goal, right? And the goal was to establish a center that would work on poverty and try to help poor people with solid academics, impacting policy to help the poor. Now, it's taken some time to get to the point where we're beginning to have that impact. So you need to that makes a commitment of time. So a goal that you make might be a personal goal, it might be a community goal, but the goal has to be relatively reachable. Okay, so everybody clear about what a goal is? But it's really important, because if you don't have a clear goal, then you're gonna wander all over the place. You're gonna say, oh yeah, that's exciting, let's go there. And then somebody else is gonna say, no, let's go this way. No, but if you have a goal, for example, if somebody tells you that, no, the SDG is really essential for the SDGs to have a really good health indicator. I agree, but that's not my goal. Somebody else can worry about the health indicator. I'm going to measure all of them, right? That doesn't mean that the other goals aren't important, but your goal, if it's clear, it means that then you can then go on with the rest of our tasks. If you're not clear with the goal, your message is going to be fuzzy. And if your message is fuzzy, the people answering are going to say, ¿Qué dijo? What did he say? You know? All right, message. It needs to support the goal directly. There's no point in wandering through left field if you can get a hit straight through the middle, right? Those of you who play baseball. Or there's no point in going and starting playing badminton if you really are on a soccer game, right? So you want to stay on topic. You want to stay on the topic and deal with details only if needed. People don't like a lot of detail. Academics love details. You don't need them. If you don't need them, don't use them. Why? Because then you get lost in the detail. And what you really want is the goal. You don't want the detail. The details come later after they've approved the goal. Yeah? Now, sometimes you need details in order to get to the goal. De acuerdo. Absolutely true. But you need to understand what level of detail does the president need, what level of detail does the minister need, what level of detail does the person actually implementing the policy need, what kind of detail does the press need, what kind of detail. Oof. It's very important to figure out what kind of detail people need, and we'll talk about the audience in a minute. Tailor the message to the different audiences. You cannot say the same thing to an academic that you can say to the president, unless the president happens to have a PhD or an MBA, like many of them do nowadays. But if they do not, and if they're not academic, if that doesn't turn them on, you don't want to go with an academic message. And it's the same thing with the media, right? You want to go to the media with a media message. And media has a very short span. Huh? I remember the first time I was asked to be on TV. I gave them a really nice talk. I called my mom. I said, Mom, I'm going to be on TV. I was so excited. I got on TV. I watched for it. Didn't show up. And I asked my communications person, so, ¿qué pasó? What happened here? Next time he comes, you have to say something a bit shorter, punchier, and more outrageous. I said, no problem. Next time he came, I gave him a punchline. What is the headline you want that paper to pick up? What is the 5-letter word headline? People starving in Ethiopia. That happens to be during the Ethiopian crisis of 1984, a long time ago. And I said that, and I said I was outraged. I can't remember what I was outraged about. I did not call my mom because I figured I didn't want to disappoint her twice. It was on TV. She never forgave me. So you want to have short, sweet, punchy, if that's the medium. I had this problem all the time, especially academics or practitioners of development. How can you possibly reduce what I've been working on for 5 years into a 3x5 card? You can't do it. Oh yeah, I can. I have to, because if not, I can't sell your work to the guy who's only interested in a 3x5 elevator pitch. He's not interested in any more than that. So you have to know your audience. You have to know what it is that they're, and you have to have your message for different audiences. Avoid using jargon. We said that. Avoid long discourses unless you need to have them. And that's the goal. Now, that's the goal. Here's why it's important. Here's how it can be done. Here's how it helps the poor. Bang, bang, bang. Nada más. That's all you need for certain people. Okay, so that's the message. Any questions on the message? You got the message? That's the most important piece. You got the message, you can go home. Okay, if you got the message. Now, some things that won't work. We did a study. That's the end of the world right there. The study is not going to be important. What's the results of the study? You don't want to go on and on about the academic study. You want to say, we did do a study. That can be in the footnote, which isn't said. And you have to have the annex with a long report, because then, like the book, the book is good, but you don't want to talk of the book. You want to talk research university sets up a research program, new institute holds a launch event. Oh yeah. Nobody's going to come to that. Whereas if you're going to use one of those factoids that Sabina said, there's many Nigerian poor people in Pakistan as there are in Pakistan. Wait, what? There's many poor people, or more poor people, as poor in Pakistan as they are in Nigeria. Ah, really? That's interesting. Let me take a look. Then they'll go to the report, then they'll go look at your footnotes, and then they'll go look at your study. Academic gives a lecture. Last time, some people go to lectures. Okay, potential audiences in general. And then we're going to get much more specific than this. But there are, in fact, specific audiences that we're going to target in a minute, but then there is this general audience. There are people who are traders in ideas. There are people who you know that if you talk to this person, they're going to talk to that person, and they're going to talk to that person. And there's this network of people, right? I mean, you know, your countries are not that big. Some countries are really tiny. You know that if you talk to 5 people, those 5 people probably talk to the right 5 other people, and in about a week, you will have done your messaging by just word of mouth to the key people. You can start a rumor that way. No, you can. But it's very important to realize who are the people you want to talk to, and how, and why, and when. Okay. So there's a general and basically academics, policymakers, development experts, civil society, the media, the international donors, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to talk about those individually now. Okay, first of all, we're going to start with your person because your person is the key person to the whole thing. We're going to start with the presidente. If el presidente says yes, forget it, you're all set. Now, if the presidente says no, forget it, you're all set. President has to say yes at some point, or at least he has to say, okay. Why? Because in most of our countries, and I say in most of our countries, if not all, at the end of the day, it goes to the top. Especially with something radically new like measuring poverty in a new way that's going to increase the poverty line. Poverty is going to go up with multidimensional poverty. You want me to sign that? That's political suicide. I'm going to lose the election. No, Mr. President, don't worry about a thing. We got that under control. So you have to have an answer for that, right? Because it might go up. It's gone up in several of these countries where they've launched the measure. So you better have an answer for him when he says, yo, dude, I have an election in 2 years. I have an election in 3 years. I'm going to lose if poverty goes up in my country. Now it's getting serious. Huh? Now you got to basically go to him and say, Mr. President, or Mrs. President. One of these days there are going to be a lot more Mrs. There are going to be a lot more Mrs. Presidents like Bachelet and Chile. You say, Mrs. President, poverty's going to go up. However, you just got into power, and over the next 4 years, we're going to have policies in place, because he said so, that are going to impact the poor. And therefore, you're going to be able to show in 3 years, yo, dude, you were a savior to the poor because poverty is going down. Will she buy that? Some people have. And you know why? Because this happens to be true. We can now show that that has been the case, like for example, in Colombia. So, but these are the kinds of communications questions you're going to get. So the president is important. At some point in most of our countries, it goes to the top. Now, usually it doesn't go start from the top. It did in a couple of times. The president figures out and says, I want to do it, fine. But usually it starts at some other level, right? Head of statistics is interested. The Minister of Social Development is interested. The Minister of Planning gets interested. Somehow he finds out about it because he read a blog, or somehow he found out about it because you told him as part of your messaging, right? And he says, oh, interesting. Let me find out more about that. Tell me more. Or because he sent you to this course, either because somebody just had the money and they'll send you, which I doubt, or because somebody in your country is interested in your being here. So therefore, when you go back, it's really important what you message, how you message, who you message, and what your goal is when you message back when you come back from this course. I'll give you an example. Last year, 2 years ago, of course we had in Nicaragua, of course we had in Latin America in Spanish, people came, blah, blah, blah. After that course, people went back to their countries. We now have MPIs in almost every Latin American country. Why? It wasn't just because, well, for a lot of reasons, they had the MPI before, there was a receptive audience, but they also had people who came to courses like this and went back with a clear message of, folks, this works. It could have an impact. We could help the poor. It could complement income. There are numerous clear messages that you have that you can then say, this will work, right? So it seems to me that, again, it's all about messaging. It's all about trying to figure out who do you talk to. Now, at some point, a government minister, at least, has to be a champion. We haven't been to any place where, at least at some point, there's a government minister who says, I'm going to take this on, and I'm going to convince the other ministers, and I'm going to go to the president. Usually it's a minister. Sometimes it's the vice president, sometimes it's the president, but usually it's a minister. And at some point, the minister has to get involved. Now, who else is important in your country? I put them here as sacred cows on poverty. What I mean by that is every country has experts on poverty, right? You have experts on poverty in your country. You have to, because there's poverty in every country, and a lot of people do good research on poverty. Whether they get money off of it or not is irrelevant. So the question then is, who are those people? And how do you communicate with them? Why do you want to communicate with them? Why do you want to communicate with people who've been working with poverty for the last 20 years, 30 years, 40 years? Yes?
Would you want tensions with them?
You don't want tensions with them. Why would there be tensions? Ah, come on, you're a nice guy. Why would you have tensions with them?
Well, you're not sort of replacing the work.
I know. You're not going to replace my work, buddy. You better be careful, because if you do replace my work, you must not be very competent.
They also know a lot.
They also what?
They know a lot about the
They know about it. They know us, they know it. But you're right. In other words, if somebody has been working on an issue for a long time, first of all, they've done very good work. We're not trying to undermine their work. You want to compliment their work. You want to say, folks, you guys have been doing great work for the last 20 years. Income poverty has gone down, if it has, whatever the situation is. But they've done some really good academic work. Now, they have not perhaps been working on the MPI, because that's new. But you want to make sure you talk to them. Why? Because you want to bring them in. You don't want to, you certainly don't want them as somebody to oppose you. You want to say, folks, we like you. We like income poverty. We like what you do. We want to continue to do what you do. However, we want to show you something that's slightly new, something different, something we'd like you to get involved in, something we want your graduate students to help our graduate students. In other words, be inclusive of those people who are in your country know about poverty, right? It makes sense. But you cannot ignore them. Why? Because if you ignore them, they might oppose you. Because it's new. Only because it's new. They may not know. Now, it's beginning to change. People are beginning to know that there's something called an MPI because it's beginning out there. But I think you need to be very careful with all these people that you're talking to in terms of what the message is. You're not against anybody. This is a new tool which complements that which is being used already. So it's a very positive message, actually. Civil society. What do I mean by civil society? Anybody have any civil society in your own countries? Nope, no civil society. What do I mean by civil society?
There are multiple organizations which represent our common people.
You? What do you
Workers'
say?
union.
Huh?
Workers' union.
Workers' unions. Who else? Who else is in the civil society?
Interest groups.
Hmm?
Interest groups.
Interest groups, think tanks, universities, churches, unions, which you said, any sort of community association, business groups that are incorporated as business groups. They're all part of civil society. Civil society is everybody. Anybody who's organized, and even if they're disorganized, they're part of the civil society. The question then is, how much do you have to communicate to that civil society? And then, who do you talk to in civil society? Because civil society is not, everybody talks about civil society. They should always be talking about civil societies with a plural, because there is no such thing as a civil society. There are many societies within that civil, right? And you need to figure out which ones are the important ones, which ones do you want to have on your side, which ones are the ones that you want to cultivate. Is it the private sector? And if it is the private sector, which group in the private sector? If it's the media, you want to cultivate the media. But if it's the churches, are they involved in this? How do you incorporate them in this? So that's another whole area, right, of who do you talk to? The press. Most of you will be targeting your national press. There's also the international press. Sometimes it's actually better for something to come out in The Economist or the New York Times than it is in the Costa Rican Tico Times. But just because nobody reads the Tico Times. But the question then becomes, is that important, or do you want to focus on La República? Do you want to focus on the national press in your country? So the press is absolutely crucial. The private sector, who gets it, who doesn't get it. And then also in many of your countries, the international agencies and donors. Unfortunately, in many of our countries, the international agencies and donors have a lot of say. Yes, ma'am.
I have a comment.
You-
So I think press is important one.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can communicate what your goal
Yeah.
by sending article for op-ed.
Yes?
I think that works also.
Yep. So the press is crucial, as you're saying. The press is very important. One way to communicate with the press is through an op-ed. I'm going to get to the press in a minute even further, because I think it's absolutely crucial. You're absolutely right. If the press turns on you, you're almost as in trouble as if the president turns on you. Because if you've got the press against you, that's an uphill battle. That's an uphill battle. Yes?
I have an example. So,
Good.
My ministry has a new program.
Yes?
Scholarship for higher education.
Good.
So the staff in my ministry sent the article to the
To the press.
to the press, and it becomes widespread. So I
Quite
think,
sad.
yeah. So I think it's a good communication.
So for example, new program, government has a new program, scholarship program. They send out the press release. It gets good attention. It gets picked up by the media. It's good.
Yeah, it's a key, but it's very dangerous to talk with press. You should be very careful in wording, because what usually press pick up is quite some ideas which might be not so relevant to the content, and then you are in a trouble. I mean, then you will need to do a lot of work to turn all of these issues backwards. So it's kind of.
Did everybody hear what she said?
Yeah.
You have to be I think you have to be careful with anybody you communicate to, but particularly with the press.
Yes.
And the press actually, the other thing you have to be ready for is you might have a 3-sentence thing that you just said. They may take 1 sentence of it, and with that other 2 sentences not there, it's a totally different thing you just said. You may have qualified it. That happened to me quite often. And so you have to be really careful. You're right. You have to try to contain everything to the press within contained short sentences, if you can. However, at the same time, it depends. There's friendly press, and if you know it's a friendly press, because sometimes it's a friendly press, and so it depends on the press too. And sometimes you know it's a friendly press, you can be very open and discuss. Yes?
No, that is the same. The press has also goals, so you have to take care about. I know in my country, you know that there is a press that is supporting
Exactly.
the political party that is governing now, and there are another press that is against.
No.
So depends of the relation with the government also.
That's
with the
true.
press, so
Absolutely true. And the other thing you just said, which is depends on the relationship with the government, the other thing you just said is very true for all communication. You have your goal, right? The person you're talking to has their own goals. To be effective in your communications, you've got to try to figure out what their goal is before you talk to them. And try to fit your goal into their goal, especially the president or the minister. Because if you go, and let's say the guy is against the private sector totally, and you go and you're trying to sell him a private sector program, you might have a great program, but he's just not going to buy it, right? So you need to know a little bit about who you're talking to. So I think that's a very good point, yes?
Oh, I was just saying, with trusting the press, not just whether or not they publish something you said. I got interviewed a few weeks ago for a university-related matter, and they ended up FOIAing the entire board of trustees for the university based on not what I said, but what a few of us said in terms of the information not being worthy of confidentiality, and then they submit a Freedom of Information Act.
Ooh.
And so now the university has to deal with the legal ramifications of collecting any board notes and all this stuff. Meanwhile, the administration told us from the beginning, just don't talk to the press. We're issuing a collective statement. This is what it's going to say. And if ever everybody had just said, I defer to the publicity statement that we're making through whatever, the president's office, we would have never gotten FOIA'd. But now it creates...
Unless they would have done an article about the fact that you weren't allowed to talk to the press, and the university stopped you from talking to the press. That's an article also. No, I mean, yes.
The point is, if you are not sure whom to talk to,
Yes.
and if you are quite sure about what you want to talk to, I think press is a very good media, because if you talk to press, you mostly talk to everybody. I mean, if you don't know selectively which civil society element you need to go to or which government minister to approach, probably you would like your findings to be out in press so that it would come to the attention of any of these actors and probably have an.
Well, that's true. No, I mean, but but I think enough said. But I think when you deal with the press, particularly, it's really true with anybody. But the press, particularly, in terms of what they have their own goal. They want to sell newspapers or whatever their goal is. So you need to be really careful. You also have to, what Sabina said at the beginning, is that you have to make sure that what you say is really true, because if not, they're going to nail you. And then they'll nail not you, but the government, the statistics office, the president, the donor that gave them the money, anybody. So you could have been the little cog in the wheel down below, but they're going to go right up the ladder with it. So you have to be very careful. That does not mean you don't talk to the press. It just means you have to have a good press strategy. It just means you have to have, hopefully, some press people who are friendly, who can get your message out, and you focus on them. If you can, at least to start. Okay, so that's very important. The other thing is, do you really need to talk to the whole civil society to get the MPI approved in your country? Maybe yes and maybe no. When we were at Oxfam, we had a program to try to influence, to try to educate the whole American community, civil society. After about 2 years of that, we said, yo, dude, we're never going to educate. We don't have the money Coca-Cola has. You know, Coca-Cola puts out one ad, you know, Oxfam puts out an ad, and 5 years later, maybe 5 people read it, you know? I mean, so we're never going to do that. So we have to be much more targeted. So targeting your audiences, because we don't have a lot of money. Our sector, poverty, never has a lot of money. So you need to target. You target the key ministers, the key president, if there's more than one. You target the president, you target the ministers, you target key academics, key people in civil society, and that's your audience. And if there's an international donor that controls the country, talk to them. Hopefully there's not. But if there are some international donors that are important in your country, include them in your audience. Because they then go and play golf with the president, or whatever they do, right? I'm serious, you're laughing, I'm serious. This is the way things get done. Okay, so that's your audience. Now, you got your audience, you've got your message, you haven't done anything yet, right? Up to now, you got a goal, you got an audience, you got a message. Oh dear, we haven't gotten very far. So far, we're thinking about it. Now what do? Possible channels. Aha! What can you do with this information? We can write reports. They're very important to have. You've got to have the technical data that you're doing on this course. You've got to have the MPI designed. The Institute of Statistics of your country, or whoever it is that does it, has got to have a report that backs up whatever your message is going to be. That's essential. That may not be what you give to the press, but it's there in case they want to see it. It's got to happen. There may be some shorter policy pieces, like answering the question, what happens, Mr. President, over the next 3 years? Here's how it happened in Colombia, or here's how it happened in Mozambique, or here's what they did with it. Boom, 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 boom. Short, sweet, 1 page, so the president can see it. Q&A, what are the main, I'm going to talk about that a little later, but what are the main questions people always have about the MPI? We don't have to invent the wheel. We're not starting from 3 years ago or 4 years ago. We're now in the 5th year of this thing, or 6th or 7th or whatever. What are the key questions? They're always going to ask you, how'd you choose the dimensions? How'd you choose those indicators anyway? Who chose those indicators anyway? What's the weight? Oh, come on, you played around with the weights to get what you wanted. Those are the questions you're going to get no matter what, no matter when, no matter who. Because those are the key questions of the building blocks of the MPI. The nice thing about your work is that it's transparent, unlike the income people sometimes are not as transparent. But it's transparent. They don't like it, they can make their own MPI and challenge it. It may not be official, but you can go online. In Mexico, you can now go online and create your own MPI with the data they have online. So I think that you have to have a sense then of reports, key questions and answers, and then you want to think about, okay, so what works in my country? Do I want to have a big bash, a big event to launch the measure, get the president, get Sabina, big deal, get the head of the World Bank or whoever, just make a big deal? Maybe. Maybe yes, maybe no. So events sometimes are important because the press will come to events. Important Oxford professor giving talk on God knows what. Sometimes that'll get the press there because there's nothing going on that day. But if that's, you have to sort of think about what is the press going to come to and what's going to get you, not just the press, but your other stakeholders. Let's say the press doesn't show up to a lecture that I'm giving in the Dominican Republic, for example. But every government agency had their people there. Was it worth it? Was it worth my going to the Dominican Republic even if the press didn't show up? The answer is categorically yes, because that's one of your key audiences. And sometimes you guys can say all you want. I'm sorry to say this because it hurts, but I've seen it happen too many times. You can say something 25 times to your minister. Somebody from outside comes in and says it once and that's it. It is a pain in the neck, but it happens to be true. So sometimes you need to bring that person from the outside just to say what you were going to say anyway. But sometimes that's true. Events, newsletters and emails, enough said. Websites, social media, you can do the rest of these. You've got to do this one. The world now doesn't move as it did in the world when I was. It doesn't move the way it has moved in the last 50, 60, 70, or 80 years, right? The way it moves now is through social media. I have a Facebook page. I open it once a year. The Twitter account. Who's twittering now? Anybody else tweeting besides Jose? Because over there I see him tweeting now. Anybody else tweeting? Okay, so Twitter's crucial. You gotta basically be tweeting saying, yo dude, there's this crazy guy talking nonsense at GW. Okay, that's a tweet. Boom. But when I was in Vietnam, Hanoi, okay, we gave a great talk. I was sitting there listening very nicely. The guy who was the number 2 guy at the UNDP, as soon as he got down from his lecture, it was all over the world. That he'd say whatever the heck he said, right? So Ophi didn't get any credit. We did all the work. Who got the work? Who got the credit? UNDP. Why? Because he tweeted. Whatever it's called. He tweeted, twittered. But whatever it's called, he did it. And he did it well. Why? Because the old guy doesn't know how to do it. So we better learn. So Twitter, Facebook, social media, blogs, you mentioned op-eds, blogs, etc. The media is important. I'm going to talk about the media. And then, this is just because I'm older, but every once in a while, a one-on-one visit is absolutely crucial. It is important to go and see the president. You don't want to just tweet the guy, you know. You want to go and see the guy. You want to basically go and see the minister and say, Minister, I'm not going to take too much of your time. I'm going to take 15 minutes of your time. Mr. President of the World Bank, I want 15 minutes of your time. Then if he wants to stretch it to 40 minutes, go mucho gusto. That's his problem. You love it. But you got to have your message down so you in 15 minutes are in. I went one time to talk to a congressman. I walked in, I said hello to Barney and Frank, who was a congressman. And I said, and he cut me off after 2 seconds. He says, what do you want? I want to know what you want. Whatever you come in here, I want to know it within 2 minutes, and I want you out of here in 5 minutes. I learned my lesson. Congressmen are busy people. So you need to know what's your message, how do you say it quickly, and how do you get out of there? They appreciate your getting out. Then they'll invite you back because they know you'll get out. A lot of people sit there and they'll never get invited back. Why? Because he knows he taught you to come in for 5, but you stayed for 30. You need to know, so Mr. President, is it time? No, stick around. Let him decide to stick around. Maybe you stick around. Okay, so the media, the old-fashioned one-on-one. Okay, so kinds of media. Thank you very much for your comment because it's absolutely true. Op-eds, print versus broadcast, all this stuff we just talked about, including infographics, more and more sort of using animated stuff, not just animated people like me, but actually animated graphs that actually get people's attention. The blogs, regional papers, newspapers, entertainment, mainstream, anything that'll get your word out in terms of media. Press releases, op-eds, events, expert comments, letters to the editor, bringing a foreign expert in, whatever it takes. But you want to get your word out. Once you have developed your MPI and you know that your goal is to establish a national MPI in Outer Mongolia, if that's your goal, then everything you do should be towards that, including my coming, your coming, anybody's coming, should be focused on that goal. And therefore, an expert comes. Letters to the editor, by the way, cost nothing. They're this long, and somebody said something about poverty. Great, just say something else. I mean, sometimes there are really easy ways of communicating without having to do an awful lot of work. Okay, so use simple words. I mean, I should have had here multidimensional, but it didn't happen. But, instead of manufacturing, you made it. I mean, you need to basically think about what kind of English do you use, or Spanish, or German, or French, or whatever it is you're speaking. But how do you get these words across where you might find, something that's very simple to get your words across? Now, this is not an over-exaggeration, because you can get lost in your own language. Okay, so who, what, when, and where? Who? Who delivers this message? Okay, now we've got the map. Now we're ready to go, right? We got to go. We know we're going to talk to the stakeholders, private sector, this stuff up. We know the message. We know who we're going to talk to. We know we're going to use the press. We know we're going to use blogs. We know we're going to... Who does all that? Who does it? You? Huh? You? Me? No, I'm really sorry. I can't do that. I mean, you can have somebody from the outside come and reinforce your message. But remember, we're developing a national measure. We're not developing an international measure. We're measuring your country. It has to be local people. It's got to be owned locally. It's got to be developed locally and owned locally and produced locally and sold locally. You might have a person come in from the outside, but if it's going to work over the long term, if it's going to be institutionalized, if it's going to be accepted, it's got to be done locally. So, who sells it? Who talks about it? Who? No ideas about who? Well, first of all, let's say you're the only person in your. Are you the only person in your office, or are you going? What's the first thing you have to do with your information? What does it mean?
Take it upstairs.
Okay, so the first thing you're going to have to sell is your boss. Okay, so who is your boss? You are the who, right? You, not me. You. You are the first who, because nobody else is here. If your boss were here, it would be him, or her, but she's not here. So you are the who. So who do you communicate to? Usually your boss. Your boss might be the minister. Your boss might be the head of statistics. Your boss might be a layer under those people. But you want to get that who to go to the next who to get to whoever is going to be the key spokes. There needs to be at least one spokesperson, champion, who takes it on, who's part of the government. Minister of Human Development, Minister of Social Development, Minister of Planning, Minister of whatever, who will basically go to the press and be the front person. Here in the States they call him the front man. But that's it should be the front person, right? It's the person who's going to be out there speaking. You can make the government, or you can make several. There can be one person out there speaking, or it can be diversified. But there needs to be a definition of who has actually got it, so they can speak it. Because a lot of people are going to get it, but not understand everything we just talked about. So it needs to be somebody who gets it, who can also speak to the different audiences. And it might be a different who to different audiences. You might want an academic to speak to the academic audiences. You may want a minister to speak to the president. You may want, so it doesn't have to be one who, but you have to figure out who the who is, right? Who? Yes. Who? Whatever, but you need to figure out who the person is who's going to do the speaking. Okay. So then, where? Where do you actually talk to these people? Excuse me, but I've gotten into it now. The question then is, where do you speak to this person? Is there any particular place? Let's say your strategy is to get to the president. How do you get to the president? Where do you speak to him? You need to think strategically. Where is he going to be? How can I get to him? Or how can if it's a minister, does he bring it up in the social development? Or what's the best avenue to get to him? Is it through this person who plays golf with him? This person who is his minister? Is it the vice president? Who is the channel that you want to have to get to the person you want to influence? You got to have in Spanish it's called a ruta, no? You have to have a route, a plan, an action plan of how you're going to get to that person. It's the only way things work. So the where is, if you can talk to him in a golf course, I don't know why I'm using golf so much, but if you can talk to him on a trip, fine. It doesn't matter where, but there has to be a where. Right? And then when, timing is everything. You don't want to go and talk to the president when he just lost the election. That's not a good time. You don't want to go and talk to the minister when there's a scandal going on and all of his attention is carried on with some scandal which he had nothing to do with, but there he is. That's just the wrong time. Oftentimes the best time is when you get them away from their normal daily routine. Oftentimes the best time to talk to a guy isn't in his office, but they happen to be on a trip or they happen to be whatever they're doing, and then you meet them someplace outside their office. Why? Because then they relax, they talk to you with more calm, and therefore you have a better shot at it. Now that's not often possible. So then you want to try to find somebody who can get to them in a relaxed moment. So that's the who, the why, the where, and the when for. Okay, and then the other thing is now I'm going to pass. That was the goal all the way down to the who and the what and the where. Okay. Now I want to turn in a few minutes. I want to do two more things, or three. First, you can read that. I don't have to read it. People like to see visuals. They don't like numbers. So the thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you have some visuals that show exactly what it is you're talking about. The MPI is like a high-resolution lens. Okay, so he's got a lens over there so everybody can look. They know what a lens is. You know, it's a camera, it looks like that. He's looking at me. Okay, but a high-resolution lens comes in and starts looking at my nose, you know. So that's what you do with this. You zoom in. MPI allows you to see that that's actually Cheerios, right? But it looks, this Cheerio, somebody took a little bite out of it. The MPI allows you to do just that for poverty. So you can zoom in and see who's poor, how they're poor, if they're poor by housing, if they're poor by health, sanitation, whatever. And that's what's interesting for policy, because it's the zoom in that allows the policy. You mean with the MPI I can actually find out that Maria Josefa, who lives in Alajuela, is poor? And your answer is yes. You can find out that Maria Alajuela, or whatever, Maria Fernanda, or somebody else in Alajuela is poor. And so then, and the minister says, wow, that's pretty exciting. So you zoom it in, and you see more. You see more detail. Or another graph. Head count. Everybody's been talking, let me review the course. We're going to review the course in a minute anyway, but this is the first one. We're going to review it again in a minute. There's H and there's A, right? Besides being ha-ha, what is it? What is H? Huh? You better know what H is, because it's not or we're in deep trouble. Okay, so H is something like the head count. Okay, and A is like, why they call it A and its intensity, don't ask me why, but there it is. It's H and its intensity. The head count tells us who is poor. We have 50% of the population poor in this country. Muchas gracias, that didn't tell me anything. But thank you very much. I now know that 50% of the people are poor. That's great. Income poverty tells me it's 52%. Okay, so there's 2% difference, so what? Aha. What does MPI do? If you stop there, one would have to say, what? It's interesting. But what we do is that we not just tell you who's poor, we tell you how they're poor. That's the difference, right? And that's what you're selling. Excuse me. That's what you're educating people about. That's what you're telling people is, this is why the MPI is important. Because from a policy point of view, it actually allows you to find out that Maria Josefa in Alajuela is poor, and she's poor because she has a terrible by the way, Alajuela doesn't look anything like this. But she has a horrible house. She has to go 1,500 miles to get some water. She lives in overcrowded conditions. She lives on a garbage dump, and her kids have not gone to education because they weren't allowed to go to this school because they weren't working. Wow. So what do we do about it? Well, we do an education program, we do a sanitation program, we do a housing program, a water program, we try to do something about the contorno, the neighborhood, and then you got yourself a developed, unpoor person, community. That's what the MPI does. Now you see the passion on which I say it? You've got to have it. I mean, you've got to have it because that's what actually it's. But the reason I'm passionate about this because I've seen it work, and I've seen that this data. I'm not a metrics guy. I never was a metrics guy. If somebody had told me 10 years ago that I'd be doing metrics, it would have been like all my friends would have said, "Yeah, right." But here it is. You can see. So this kind of a graph. It's not a. There's no number, right? You haven't seen a number yet in any of my presentations. Any numbers? No, I'm going to change that in a second. And then I thought, you don't want to do it in English, right? So you want to do it in Spanish. This is another graph. Do it in your own language, in your own way. There are lots of things you can do. You can do it in this way. It can be decomposed in different ways. You can do it. You can change it around. But play with it. Sabina was talking about playing with the data in the sense of finding out what's the facts. Taking those facts and thinking about them, thinking what are the exciting facts. Do the same thing with your public relations group. And say, yo, dude, we're not just going to sell an equation of H times A equals no sé qué. That's not going to sell. What's going to make a difference to the policymaker is if you show them something like this. And it can be something totally different. You can make it up yourself. These are just some ideas. Okay. Any questions so far? Now we've changed the world, revolutionized the world. Now I want to show you something. Oh, wait, no, not yet. I mentioned this before, but have a Q&A, guys. Have a question and answer which answers these questions. Why these dimensions? Why these indicators? Why these weights? They're going to ask you, so you better have the answers. And the way to have the answers is you go back to your data and the way you constructed it. When you make an MPI, by the way, keep track minutely of every decision you make. Because every decision you make about an indicator or this or that influences the final measure. And somebody's going to ask you, hey, how come you did that? You say, I have no remembrance of that one. Actually, we decided that 5 months ago and I have no clue. That's not going to fly. So you need to keep notes. On January 18th, we decided, August 18th, whatever, we decided X. And then put it down, so because I will forget it tomorrow. You might forget it in a week or two, but you are going to forget it. Okay. And why the cutoffs? Anticipate for it. Memorize or make notes about all this stuff. And I think it's really important to do. Okay? Okay, I'm going to move on though, and then just my last one on this. Oh, actually, no. Make a communications plan, and what I've been talking about, that is a communications plan. Going from the goal to the tools, that's your communications plan. Ensure it has support of your boss, that's numero uno. And then get professionals if you need it, get to know journalists if you need it, and keep it simple. Okay. Principles of an effective, know your audience. How much time do you have? So for example, let's say that somebody's invited you to give an interview, press. And you're going to say, or to go see a congressman. You need to know how much time you have, or you have to anticipate how much time you might have. Because if you know they're going to give you an hour, then you can relax. You can take your time, you can take out the material. But if you know that you have an elevator pitch 1 minute, or if you're on TV, you got 30 seconds, then you go right for your goal. I want an SEG, MPI, Tier 1, boom. Because that's all the time you have. So you need to know the time, how much time do you have, the elevator pitch, you've got to have an elevator pitch. Everybody in your organization, if you're going to do this MPI, should know what the elevator pitch is. You know what an elevator pitch is? Who knows what an elevator pitch is? Yes. No, wait, you've already said something. Way in the back, you haven't said anything.
Like 30 seconds, what you're going
30 seconds. How long does it get to the first to the second floor? It's less than 30 seconds.
True, even less.
So that's a 7-4, 30-minute pitch. But yes, it's how much time do you have between the ground floor, which Americans call the first floor, to the 6th floor, the 5th floor, the 3rd floor, the 1st floor. If the president's getting off after, and you know they're getting off at the 2nd floor, it's 10 seconds. If you know they're going to, probably you don't know what floor they're getting off. But that's an elevator pitch. Is having a sense of how much time do you have, how do you make that short thing, and also dress and appearance. I walk in today with a coat. Yeah, I want a coat and tie, right? I walked in with a coat. Why do I have a coat on? What image do I give off if I have a coat on? Huh? Professional. Oh my God, the guy knows what he's talking about. Now, it may not be the real reason. The reason is that I'm cold, okay? But you may think it's because I'm professional. However, if I walk in like this, what image do I give? Working person, a guy who's working hard. I've been working out there with the people. So dress is important. Depends on what image you want to give. And now in this particular thing, it's mostly a professional image we want to give because we know what we're talking about. We're experts. We're statisticians. We have the answers. We just created an MPI. Therefore, you don't want to give a loosey-goosey, oh, I got my jeans on kind of impression. That's not what's going to go very far. Unless you're going out to the beach with the president. Then it's fine. Okay, so dress, use of technology, hands and eyes. If I were to give a lecture to you and I was looking at Booba the whole time, Booba, thank you very much. Stop typing and look. Okay, if I was looking at him all the time, what would you be thinking about my lecture? You'd be thinking, what the hell's going on in that part of the room? You'd be looking over there too. You'd be saying, yo, dude, what's going on? So what you do with your eyes, if you're watching, and especially if you're on TV, anybody watch TV? Have you ever noticed anybody who gives a lecture or a talk and they go like this? Periodically? They look shifty. Right? They look shifty. What the hell's he look? Oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Or he tilts his head. Oh, that means he's not very dynamic. He's not very forceful. This is what presidential candidates learn about, okay? You don't need to learn all this. But you need to know that appearance, dress, and if you're going to be on TV, you do need to learn that Dick Nixon lost the first election because he looked terrible on TV. Back in 1960. Okay, so language, habits. When I first went on TV, I thought I'd done a great job. I got back. My communications person said, "You can't do that, man." I said, "Why?" He said, "You say in fact every 10 seconds, and in fact this, and in fact that, and in fact what the? There, just knock the in fact out, man. You wasted. First of all, you wasted a lot of TV time, and second of all." After a while, it got to be, he's going to say it again. He's going to say it again. Okay, so you got to make sure, and the only way to learn that, by the way, is to have somebody, if you're going to get into this field of communication, have somebody video you It's the only way to learn. Because you don't know what you're doing. You really don't. Until somebody videos you and they tell you. And then before you go and do anything, by the way, this is true in anything, whether you're going to propose or whether you're going to talk to your president or whether you're going to lecture, relax, man. If any of you do yoga, if any of you do Zen, if any of you do meditation, do it then, man. I don't have time to do it. Go to the bathroom and do it for a minute. I'm being very serious, by the way. I'm being very serious because you need to relax. Because if you're tense, it comes off. Be honest. As Sabina said, always be upfront and always tied to something that's going on and something that's going to get that person interested. Why are they interested? Why will they be interested? What's going on locally and what's it going to solve for them? So, you still with me? Do we have enough energy for one more thing? Actually, two more things? Two more things. First, park everything you just learned out there. Okay? Just pretend you're the president of outer Slovenia or the president of George Washington University. They don't know who Alkire is. They don't know who Foster is. They don't know nada. What do you present? They've asked me to present the Alkire-Foster method. Oof. I can just see my shoulders getting heavy. H times A plus no sé cuánto. I mean, oh dear. Okay, so I'm going to show it to you now the way that I have had the nerve to present it to other people. Here's an intuitive explanation. We assume equal weights. Why? Don't ask me why. We assume equal weights. Now, what we're going to do is there are going to be 4 people in this country. Sabina, Adriana, me, and Mauro. Who's the most dreadfully bad person off in this list of people in the country? Me. Okay. So there are 4 people in this country. This D stands for what? It doesn't stand for dumb, okay, for John. No. It stands for deprivation. I don't know what's the deprivation? Oh dear. What's the deprivation? How do you know that I have a deprivation here in health? Aha! That was last week. How do I know that how does somebody know that I'm deprived in health?
Data.
Huh?
Your data.
Pure data. What do they do with the data? How do they know that? Yeah, I'm sure it's data. I can cook, huh?
Through survey, data comes through surveys.
Huh? The cutoff.
Because the law says something about...
You're below something, right?
Yeah.
So there's a cutoff here, right? I mean, there has to be a cutoff. Let's assume that it's primary school. Let's assume it's primary school. It means that I only got to the 3rd. I got to 7th grade. I'm deprived, right? So there's a cutoff already here. We've already done it. Here's of education, health. I don't have health insurance. That's the cutoff. Housing index. My house is a disaster. That's the cutoff. I'm malnourished because of whatever reasons, there's a cutoff. So we've had one cutoff, right? We've already decided, okay, now that tells me that John is in deep trouble. He's deprived of all these different things. Sabina, because she's the boss, she is on anything, right? So she's doing very well, thank you very much, right? Okay, so then you got people in the middle like Adriana, she's more or less off. Mauro, who isn't here, has got 1. Okay, so what does that tell me? Huh? That doesn't tell me very much. But it does tell me that these people in this country are deprived by these things. That's good. What's the next step on the Alkire-Foster method? Huh? Speak up!
Intensity.
Well, before intensity, what do you have to do? Now we know who's deprived and what. Okay, so we know that this person, because for my example, you do have to know, does everybody know how to count to 4? You need to know how to count to 4, and you need to be able to divide. That's all you need to know. Now, we've got 2 people deprived, 2, 4, 1. Okay, that's what we got. So what is the next decision we make in the Alkire-Foster method? We have... No, I missed it. So basically we have to say, we have to make a second cutoff. So now, Mr. President, we're going to decide they're not poor. We don't have to worry about them. We're going to basically, if we do anybody with 1 deprivation or over, 3/4 of the country, you're going to have so many poor people in this country that it's going to be too many. So we have to have a cutoff, which basically says a certain number of people are poor, but not everybody, because if it's everybody, what's the point? So we're going to say anybody who has 2 or more people in this country are poor. Okay? Now, how many people are poor in this country? With that definition? 2, I think you said. 2? What percentage of the people are poor in this country? 50%, Mr. President. We have a 50% rate of poverty in this country. What does that translate into in terms of the Alkire-Foster measure? That's the age, right? So, we then have a head count of 2/4, 50% of the population is poor. That gives us the head count. Great. Now that we have the head count, Mr. President, however, we have to go one step further, because boy, the next step is the one that's really going to be interesting to you. If we cut, now for you, I don't usually have that up there. If we cut the cutoff at 2 or above, then you've got 4 people. Okay, now what's the interesting thing? I now have to take these poor people. I don't worry about these guys because they're no longer poor. I take these people and I say, okay, how poor are they? This person's poor in 2 out of 4, right? This person's poor in 4 out of 4. If I take all my poor people and I say, how much poverty do they actually suffer from? I have to sort of figure out what the relationship is here, right? So I've got 2 out of 4 here. I've got 4 out of 4 here. If I happen to multiply the 2 of those, put them together, I get 3/4, right? So far, you have to know a little bit of. So my intensity of poverty is 3/4. Right? So all I have to do then, Mr. President, 75% of the people are intensely poor, 50% of the people have that kind of intensity. And then what it means is that you have on MPI, brings all that together, the head count plus the average intensity, and you get an MPI of 3.7. Now why is this important, Mr. President? Here's why it's important. Let's assume that I have an intervention in health. I'm going to now have a health intervention here. John is poor in all 4 things, right? However, if there's an intervention there, and all of a sudden John, is not deprived in that, what happens? I'm still poor. I have 3 out of 4. I'm still poor. Right? I'm poor. This guy's still poor. Nothing happened to him. He's still poor. However, what happened? Because I made an intervention here, it shows up here, and from 3.7 it goes down 3.1 because the intensity of poverty has been reduced. So, Mr. President, you're going to get credit for health programs, housing programs, education programs where you're spending $1 billion now, but you're not going to get credit for it. You're going to get credit for it when you make those interventions and they actually go into the poverty line. So you're going to be able to see that it actually makes a difference in people's lives. They may still be poor, and I'm not even talking about income. Now, if that intervention had been made here rather than here, if it had been here, then this person would not be poor at all. Your head count would go down, your intensity would go down, and you'd have an even better MPI.
So we have a problem there.
Huh?
We have a problem there.
Yeah, you have a problem.
Because we are targeting in the not in the most poor.
Exactly. If you do this, and many governments do that, I'm glad you raised that. Many governments try to pick off the easy ones. Why? Because they're easy.
For my goal, I have a problem there.
Yeah, but the nice thing about the MPI is it allows you to see who's the poorest, and then try to get governments to focus on the poorest. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But does everybody get this simple explanation of how one intervention can impact the bottom line of the MPI? From a policy point of view, the MPI makes a difference. Not just in the lives of poor people, but in the lives of how poverty is viewed and measured. Questions, comments, concerns, reactions? This guy's full of it. What? No? Questions? No? Yes, sir.
So I clearly understand the difference between targeting and non-targeting, but government, say in India it has happened. So especially for a public distribution system, we moved to a targeting system in the middle of late 90s, and now we are going back to universal public distribution system. So what number will encourage?
We haven't talked about targeting yet, right? But I think, so, this same methodology, we're talking about targeting tomorrow, I think, right? So I think I'm gonna leave that, but I think this is basically for the MPI as a national measure. For targeting, however, we are beginning to use and explore the targeting methodology for targeting. And we have a number of countries, for example, the Dominican Republic, Honduras, and others, who are interested now not just in the global measure, but how do we use it for targeting? And so it's absolutely, and it's a crucial question. And sometimes the data that one needs is slightly different, but we'll talk about that tomorrow. I want to do one more thing in the last 10 minutes I have, if that's okay. Is that all right? Just run through one more thing. Don't need to stretch, then we'll take a cup of coffee. I want to do one thing that's a bit different, but I don't know whatever other time I'm going to have it to do it. So one of the things that I want to communicate to you is the Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network. Has anybody heard of that? Oh dear. Pass these out, please. The Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network is a network of countries. OFI, Mexico, and Colombia were working in the 2011, 2012, we were working with a lot of statistics offices, and we realized that we weren't getting any political support. That there was going to be a lot of interest in the statistical offices, but it wasn't going, as you said, up. So the Mexican government, the Colombian government, and OFI decided to start this network. And we decided to launch it in Oxford. And we got Amartya Sen to come and give a major lecture. And we thought that if we got 8 countries there, we would have done quite well. The president of Colombia decided to come and inaugurate the network because it was such an important tool in Colombia. So he came to England for the purpose of inaugurating the network. 16 countries showed up at that time. Ministers from Africa, Asia, Latin America, to talk about multidimensional poverty in 2013 at the ministerial level. These were now the ministers of planning, the ministers of social development, President Santos, talking about poverty in a very informal setting. The whole idea of this network is not to have government positions, but rather to have a network where ministers can talk freely about what's working, what doesn't work, ask questions, and talk to peers. So we had a meeting in Oxford in 2013. We had a second meeting in 2014 in Germany. And these are some of the countries that came to that first meeting, from Angola, Bhutan, and Brazil, all the way to Philippines, Peru, Vietnam, China, and some organizations like the OECD, the Organization of American and Caribbean States, etc. We were quite overwhelmed by the response in 2013. And then they decided in that meeting that they would put the secretariat of this network at OFI. So OFI now has the secretariat of this network. There was a presidential Santo that I just mentioned all this, roundtable discussions, Amartya Sen lecture, and then the second one was a meeting in Berlin where we had the vice president of Costa Rica, the vice president of the Dominican Republic, the prime minister of St. Lucia, and a lot of ministers from a lot of countries. This time it was like 27 countries, something like 20-something countries, who came to Berlin and talked about multidimensional poverty. To be a member of the network, you do not have to have an MPI, clearly, not that many times, but you just have to be interested in it. You want to have to be interested in learning about it. So we have members of countries there who are countries that are just come to find out what's happening with it and start the process of thinking about it. And so it's been a very interesting exchange. And because it was created by Colombia and Mexico, it really is a South-South network. This is not something that's been created by an international agency. So we had people like the person from Honduras, etc., that were at these meetings. The interesting thing of these meetings is that it brings together people who have experience, like the Mexicans, the Colombians, the Chileans, the Bhutan folks, the Malaysians have now done a measure, and brings them together with people who are developing the measure right at this moment. For example, you have Honduras, Costa Rica, El Salvador, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Paraguay, working actively on their measure in Latin America and about to announce it. There are places like Tunisia that are working on it, South Africa, which is halfway there. We need the political support now. Places like Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh City has developed the measure, so there's a city of 12 million people who has an MPI. The state of Minas Gerais in Brazil has an MPI. And so It's begun to expand as a network of groups that not only thinking about it, but are doing it. The Caribbean islands, the Eastern Caribbean states have been working on this for a while, and St. Lucia is the first one that's actually doing it, but we have a couple of representatives here from other islands that are thinking of that are going to implement it, that are part of the process. So the network has 3 goals. Remember I had to say you had to be clear on your goals? We have 3 goals. Expand multidimensional poverty index at the national level. Whoops, when I cross that out, I cross out a word. To expand the national MPI, to make sure that we have a global MPI in the SDGs, and to promote research and development practical tools. Those are the 3 goals. Those are the same 3 goals we've had for 3 years. Those are the goals in 2013, same goals we've had now. We continue to work away, and I don't know if I have too much time to talk about the SDGs, but right now we're right in the thick of it in terms of getting this approved as an indicator. Most of you already probably know that multidimensional poverty was already approved last week. Finally, in the final decision before September, goal 1.1 is income poverty, 1.2 is multidimensional poverty. So multidimensional poverty is in the goals. Now what we're interested in is seeing that they actually adopt something to measure the goals with. And the MPI we think is a good tool rather than just having a dashboard. So that's what I just said. I mean, we had Colombia, Mexico, Germany, but we've hosted side events in the General Assembly, both in 13 and 14. This year, Costa Rica is sponsoring the meeting in September 27th. And we're in the process of trying to, the Costa Rican president said he's coming, but we're also trying to get others to come to that meeting. Again, to show that there's country support for the MPI. So a lot of agencies have supported this, and I'm just going to, the Islamic Fund for Development, the Islamic Development Bank is working with us. We're doing a program, a training program like this one in Senegal in November with the Islamic Development Bank in Cesric. We're working with CEPAL quite clearly and come out with a regional CEPAL measure for the region and other intersections which I won't go into. So let me end by just saying that why are we doing this? And I'll end with what we started with. Sabina started talking with the idea that we need facts. We are academically solid people. In other words, we have to, whatever we're going to try to take to others, we want to make sure that it's grounded in reality and in the best facts we have. We all know that sometimes our data is as good as it is. Sometimes it's very good, sometimes it's not so good, but it's what we have. And what we want to make sure is that we ground whatever we say in facts. Whatever we ground whatever we say in the reality that those facts give us. At the same time, it's not enough just to have facts. You have to find how to communicate those facts. Sometimes by being creative in your analogy, sometimes by having factoids, but always by having some sort of a communication strategy. It doesn't have to be a full-blown experts, but just something that clearly tells you, here's what we have to do. And that's essential, because as I said at one point during this talk, if we don't, in anything you do in life, you may have a great idea, but if you can't communicate it, it doesn't exist. I mean, it's true in your personal lives, it's true in any life, you know. And so you need to be able to think about, okay, so how do I take what I know? How do I take what we just found out in our statistics office? How do I take what I just figured out in my PhD? Besides getting my PhD, how do I communicate this? Not just to my advisor, but then also to a broader circle. So I think communications is crucial, I think, to what we do. We're the techie types, I mean, we're the technical people. A lot of people are out there communicating stuff that is not based on anything. It's just based on their whim and their thoughts and their ideas. What we're trying to do is say, yo, folks, we can actually base our ideas and our thoughts and our programs on real data. But to do that, we have to have good data, and then we have to be able to communicate it. Thank you very much.